Welcome to the Interpreting Wine Hospitality Podcast. I am, of course, your host and podcast founder, Lawrence Francis. Welcoming you to this, my London Mezcal Week series. The series features brand ambassadors, authors, bar owners, and producers, and is the most comprehensive coverage I've ever given to a drinks category. And I think given the important time we're at in the evolution of Mezcal, covers lots of the issues as well as lots of the great taste to be found within. So here we go, today's episode of the London Mezcal Week series. Today's episode of the podcast features Mezcal author Tom Bullock. We hear his origin story and in-depth research he did in order to write his book. We talk entry points into the world of Mezcal, and he provides us with resources for getting started. Enjoy.
Hi, my name is Thomas Bullock, and I am a Mezcal enthusiast. And the reason that I came to be so was through tasting my first Mezcal on New Year's Eve 2006 in Mexico. I was there to DJ, and a friend of mine a Mexican friend of mine had recently been introduced to the profound delights of Mezcal, and had bought a batch to to put into his nice nightclub that he had called La Santanera in Playa del Carmen. And so he poured me this Mezcal, and a lot came together in that moment. I had actually quite recently, 6 months before, gone into Native American teepee ceremony, and the medicines that we were taking there really woke up in response to this sip that I had that night. And I think the combination of those two things matched up with the kind of things that matter to me in life. I was able to sort of sense like the quality of the good nature behind these things, and the deep culture involved in bringing these things into being. Sounds a bit cosmic, but yeah, that's what it is. Or to make these things, the endeavor of kind of communal craftsmanship to use these different natural materials to create something larger than the sum of the parts. And I really sort of, all of that spoke to me, and I kind of knew. And it wasn't like a sort of a clear picture in it wasn't like in my kind of conscious mind I was just like, oh, here we go. But there was a definite sort of inner voice that was just like, yeah, hello, and that stayed with me. And my friend Alejandro, who went on to organize the brand Papa Diablo, he began to he was excited. He'd really just bought this batch from the wonderful Hector, who is also responsible for a lot of the work with Los Anzantes and Alipus and so on. He and a maestro distiller, actually, Hector, a young man, so it's kind of an unusual thing. And so Hector had given Alejandro that batch. Alejandro then became quite interested and started exploring in the rural communities and tasting mezcals, and invited me along. He's like, man, you really got to see this. So I was kind of like just feeling this great kind of excitement and passion and wonder, and going out there and sort of experiencing these communities just as much as the mezcal, and all of that really just out of kind of sheer joy. And it was after about 4 or 5 years of that I was just like, okay, you know, I think that this needs to kind of be part of my life in a, you know, in a more everyday way. And so then I started Spirit Bear Mezcals, which was an independent distributor here in the UK. I only sold mezcal, only sold craft mezcal. And I began that, and that was, when was that? It was about 2012, I think, when that actually kicked off. And I did that for a number of years here in London before Quarto Publishing asked me to write a book on the subject, which was exciting. I sort of styled that out. I've never written anything before, but I was like, yeah, no problem, you know. And went off down to Mexico, lived there while I wrote this book, and, you know, learn a lot more and learn a great deal. And kind of coming out the other side of that, I was sort of wondering really what I would do with all this experience. And I didn't feel like being involved in the monetary side of it in the way that I had been anymore. And since then, I've just been giving talks on, you know, what is really going on down there, and trying to raise consumer awareness of, you know, where their money goes when they're buying mezcal. And there are some really great brands that are doing really great work, and that's where the money needs to go. There are an equal number of really misguided business people who are eroding the thing we love, and when our money goes to them, you know, we're really contributing to the erosion, you know, the termination of not just the mezcal but the communities that make it. And that's a really you know, that's something that I feel I can't be complacent about. So I'm here to sort of talk about that stuff and hopefully not bring everybody down.
How can somebody kind of get off on the right foot? You know, if they're kind of just coming into this world of mezcal and, you know, really exploring it. And I'm guessing, yeah, the kind of the wave is coming to the UK. It's perhaps not as far along as in the US and Mexico. But yeah, if somebody who, you know, tying this into, like, I guess our wider awareness of plastics and sustainability, you know, all of these things, and you know, how do you think can somebody get off on the right foot if they're kind of exploring this category and you know, exploring this drink?
Well, no, it's a really good question, Lawrence, because it's not as easy as one might hope to make a positive choice when you're selecting your mezcal at the liquor store. You know, behind the bar, thankfully, lots of bar folk are really clued up. You know, they're really excited. It's sort of seen, mezcal's seen as the barman's tipple. And, you know, a lot of them have some good info to pass on. But when you're kind of choosing for yourself, you know, I think that, you know, you got to, and it's part of the fun. It's part of the adventure. Is having the knowledge, so to speak, the way to, as one does with wine. No, you kind of like, you know, there's a region, there's a year, and those sort of things. And there are ways of reading labels that can give you clues, and, you know, you feel like, you know, quite the Don when you're able to, like, you know, select that the right one out of a collection of mezcals. You don't necessarily have to go big on the costs. You know, one would hope, and I think, you know, most all the time, it would be right to think that if you kick down, you know, $100 or more, you're you're into some pretty good territory. You're going to be picking up something that's made with, you know, real skill and integrity. You know, and there's a lot of bottles around the kind of 60 plus range that also really know, you know, the brands know what they're doing. They know how to scale up their productions to provide volume for their brands without damaging the culture. It's kind of more in that, like, what people call the entry level range, around sort of 40 quid or so, where I think that the peril lies, because there are brands there that will market themselves as traditional and that kind of wording, and they manage to have enough tradition involved in their production to kind of feel guilt-free about labeling it in such a way. But actually what's happening to the communities where it's being made, and actually to the quality of the spirit, is not supporting that tradition at all. So how do you locate those kind of bottles? I mean, a kind of rule of thumb is anything at 40%, anything below 45% is to be questioned. And dare I say, pick up a copy of my book, because there are some pointers in there. The Mezcal Experience by Tom Bullock. Sorry, not to sound like I'm plugging the thing, but there are some pointers, and it's a fun read.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was great to hear from you the passion that you have for the Mezcal category. I have, of course, left below a link of where you can buy Thomas's book, The Mezcal Experience. So do be sure to check that out. If you're enjoying the London Mezcal Week series, and you haven't already, do be sure to subscribe to the podcast at interpretingwine.com/listen. Next time on the podcast, in episode 320, I'll be sitting down with Roberto Artuzio and Christian Bugaida of leading Italian mezcal bar La Punta Expendio de Agave. See you then.